or something, I'll try to be.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the professional webinar for the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. We're going to give it a couple of minutes, maybe 2 more minutes, so people can log on and join this webinar. In the meantime, in the chat box, why don't you type where you're from, where you're joining us from in the meantime, and we'll start very soon after 10. So Orange County, I see. Oh, Burrards, New Smyrna Beach, Citrus. We've got a lot of people today. St. Lucie, Marion, Brandon, Miami-Dade. Wow, more Broward, Land O'Lakes, Volusia, Key West. Let's see, it's 10 o'clock. Let's see, Tampa, Hillsborough, Marion. Looks like it's slowing down a bit, so I'm going to go ahead and get started in respect to your time. Give me 1 second. Well, good morning. I am Jen Marvin, the statewide education coordinator for the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, and I would like to welcome you to the Florida Friendly Landscaping Professional Webinar Series. Today, the webinar is Staying Ahead of the Invasion Curve Throughout the UF IFAS Assessment with Dr. Seokmin Kim. Your microphones have been muted. We will be closing the chat feature during the presentation. Please put any questions that you have during the presentation into the Q&A box, and we will take them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is approved for 1 FFLCP, LIAF, FDAX, which includes LF, LCLM, LLO, and CLO, DBPR, which is Landscape Architects and Community Association Managers, and 1 FNGLA CEU. There is a $15 administration fee to receive a certificate for continuing education. We will put the link in the chat box to make where you can make payment for the certificate if you have not already done so. Let's see, we will submit the CEUs to the licensing agency on Friday, so make sure to make the payment if you want the CEU by the end of the day. This is a part of a monthly webinar series held on the second Tuesday of the month at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Our next regularly scheduled webinar will be June 10th with Dr. Gail Hansen on high performance landscapes and the metrics and standards that can be used to create sustainable landscapes. Also, you will see a survey invitation pop up. Please take a minute to fill this out, as it's really important to help us determine what educational programs to offer in the future. Without further delay, I will introduce Dr. Seokmin Kim. Seokmin is an ecologist interested in studying the consequences of human disturbances in ecosystems and assessing the effectiveness of conservation and management strategies. He obtained his PhD from the University of Miami, where he studied the mutualistic relationships between plants and animals. Specifically, he focused on seed dispersal and recruitment in the Caribbean. He currently oversees the UF IFAS assessment, where he uses literature-based tools to evaluate the invasion risk of plants from Florida. Dr. Kim, welcome. I'm going to let you have the floor now.
Great, thank you, Jen. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today and listening to my talk about invasive species, the work I do with the UF IFAS assessment, and some things that everyone can do to better manage this very important problem. So I know Jen gave you a quick introduction, but I wanted to start by giving another introduction about myself. So first of all, I'm an ecologist interested in managing human effects on ecosystems. I received my PhD at the University of Miami, where I studied the ecology of plants and animals in the Caribbean and how they have been affected by people. I recently started working with the University of Florida as a postdoc associate and as the IFAS assessment coordinator with Dr. Luke Flory, pictured here as my boss. Finally, I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer from Fiji, so I really value the opportunity to engage directly with communities and stakeholders such as yourselves. What I am not, however, is a Florida native or gardener or landscape manager. So you all may have much better understanding of Florida plants and landscapes than I do, but I'll do my best to explain invasive species in general anyway. So today, I'll be taking you through the basic concepts in invasion ecology, and then going into more detail about different management strategies and efforts with the focus on invasive plants. All right, so first, I'll establish the terminology to be used based on the Invasive Species Council definitions, emphasize that not all non-native species are necessarily invasive. Next, I'll explain the Blackburn's model of the stages of invasion with simple examples. Then I'll discuss some negative environmental, economic, and human health impacts of biological invasions. And finally, I will walk through the invasion curve and briefly discuss prevention efforts that we do at the UF IFAS Assessment. So here I present definitions that adhere to the terminology developed by the Invasive Species Council, and I find it helpful to mention some of the synonyms as well. So the first is native, or a species that occurs naturally in a specified geographic area. Pretty straightforward. So the second is non-native, which is a species that does not occur naturally in a specified geographic area. So these are also sometimes called exotic, but that terminology is being phased out, I believe. Regardless, expect to see both non-native and exotic being used interchangeably. So the third is established species, which is a non-native species that have a self-sustaining and reproducing population in a specified geographic area. This is also sometimes called naturalized, and I personally have used and seen those terms used interchangeably. And then the fourth, is invasive species, which are harmful non-native species. I discourage using any synonyms for invasive species in general. Now, I know the term alien has been used before, but that has generally been phased out now, at least in the United States. And anyways, when I personally think of aliens, I think of extraterrestrial ETs, so I would just stick with the term invasive species when we're talking about these kind of stuff. So now finally, one term that I have not used so far is weed. So I want people to think about for a bit what this could be, especially if there could be such a thing as a native weed. Okay, so here's a definition that I like to use. A weed is a plant, whether it be native or non-native, that is not valued in a place where it is growing. A good example of a native weed is the poison ivy. Therefore, yes, a native plant can also be a weed. So with all of that, it's very important to note that while all invasive and established species are non-native, not all non-native species are automatically invasive. However, invasive species are always harmful. So now that we have the terminology set, now that we have the terminology set, we can move on. So here we have the invasion process, which is a process that all non-native species need to progress through before they become invasive and start actually having impacts. Therefore, not all introductions necessarily result in an invasion. And I'll try to go through each of these steps now. So first, we have transport. So here you can see just how interconnected we are globally. The light colored lines illustrate flights, the blue are shipping routes, and the green are global roads, and these are only the ones that show up on the maps. Now, the pros and cons of globalization can be debated forever, but one effect that globalization has had is facilitating the transport of species around the world. The pathways of introduction are broken down into intentional and accidental. Intentional dispersal can be from horticultural or agricultural means, or even introduced as a means of controlling erosion or improving wildlife. The kudzu vine is an excellent example of an intentional introduction gone wrong. So the kudzu vine was introduced in the early 1900s as a means of controlling erosion, and even as a forage plant before it became really out of control. Then we have accidental introduction. So this is the emerald ash borer, which is known for devastating ash tree population in the United States. This species was transported in untreated wood, such as these wooden pallets shown here, which then led to infestations in new areas. So here we have a good example of how things are both transported and then introduced to new areas. One thing we could have done to prevent such introduction is to have made sure that all wood products were better treated. And the species would never have moved along from the transport stages of the invasion process into actually being introduced. So let's talk a little bit about understanding our role in the introduction phase. So I know that many of us here today are landscapers and urban developers. Well, 82 to 94% of invasive wooded plants in the United States has been linked to ornamental plant trade, forestry, and agriculture. One example that I show here is the Callery pear. So this was promoted widely as a street tree and for landscaping as an evergreen flowering pear. While it was thought to be generally self-incompatible or unable to produce fertile seeds when self-pollinated, it was shown to be able to produce viable seed when cross-pollinated with different cultivars, although that was discovered too late. And it has thus become super invasive by spreading out of control. It has been doubly troublesome as the Callery pear are pretty weak trees physically that are really vulnerable to wind and ice and therefore can cause all sorts of property damage. Another example that I like to share is the Pangam oil tree, or Pangamia. This was promoted as a street tree back in the day and is currently being grown as a crop in Florida. I have recently been involved with the team monitoring this plant, and we unfortunately have documented an uptick in escaped populations of Pangamia, particularly along canals and rivers in South Florida. And then when they establish, they tend to crowd out native species, and they even can potentially poison waterways by dropping their toxic seeds. Thankfully, we haven't found any evidence that these plants originated from currently managed agricultural lands. However, we suspect that some may have escaped from abandoned Pangam oil plantations. We're almost done writing a short paper about this now, so stay tuned for that. The next step in the invasion process is establishment, or the ability of the plant to persist in an area. Perhaps the most important factor for this is climate matching. So here I have drawn lines on the map to show how much of the continental United States lines up with the rest of the world. So much of the area in the southeast United States, especially Florida, match up with some of the most biodiverse regions in the world. And this is only when we're just looking at the northern hemisphere. Then here in the second map, we have a distribution of the mimosa tree. While its natural distribution ranges from East to West Asia, it has since become established and sometimes invasive in the United States and Europe. So here you can really see how there's so few occurrences outside of its native climate range. So Florida's suitable climate and the abundance of pathways are some of the major reasons why Florida is so susceptible to invasion. Yes, we've already discussed how climate is known to be similar to some of the most biodiverse regions in the world. However, Florida is also a huge tourism and trade hotspot, with more than $80 billion of cargo and 120 million tourists visiting Florida every year. So the top photo you see here is the port of Miami, and it just illustrates just how much cargo sits on those ships. One estimate says that 85% of all non-native species that enter the United States move through the port of Florida. For these reasons, we have more than 1,400 non-native plant species recorded in Florida compared to about 2,400 native plants. So a huge proportion of all plants in Florida are deemed to be non-native. However, accessibility to resources is also important to establishment. So I like to think kind of like animals in this case because working with animals sometimes makes more sense in my head. So specialist eaters such as these koalas, which only feed on eucalyptus trees, they only feed on a limited number of sources, while generalists can eat all kinds of foods like this feral pig. So in this case, generalists tend to be more successful invaders. Like you don't see invasive koalas bears, but you see feral pigs everywhere. Now to kind of talk about plants again, with plants, specialist pollinators come to mind. And a good example of a plant with specialist pollinators are fig plants, which require specialized wasps to pollinate them. And so if those specialized pollinators don't exist, then the plant is unlikely to become established. Therefore, Therefore, plants with specialist pollinators are much less likely to become established. So next in the invasion process is the spread potential. Generally, many invasive plants exhibit common traits that helps the invasion spread faster and farther. So here I'm using plants as an example where plants that have a short reproduction cycle, high seed production, effective long distance seed dispersal, and the ability to disperse vegetatively tend to be more adapted to spreading and ultimately becoming invasive. So a plant like the avocado at the top, where it only produces one giant seed, is much less likely to spread far than, say, the Brazilian pepper tree in the middle, which produces hundreds of fruits and hundreds of seeds. Additionally, plants that can disperse long distances by floating, such as the palm oil tree, which you can see kind of floating there at the bottom, have a much greater potential to disperse than those that cannot float. However, there are also traits that plants can have that takes advantage of humans to move around. So the first are plants that have these spikes that sticks to clothing and shoes, such as the mission grass shown here. The second are those that can be moved around accidentally. So there's a bit of an overlap with the previous category, I know, but the ones that comes to mind for this kind of plants are those that have small seeds, like the melaleuca tree. So these small trees can get stuck in soil and moved around by other vehicles or by foot, or even as a contaminant in garden waste. And finally, we have intentional dispersal. So here I'm thinking of the many invasive plants that are readily sold online in places like Amazon. Now, I'll be willing to bet that most of the plants that buy these plants are not doing it because they're malicious and want to harm the environment, but they do this because they simply don't know that certain plants can be invasive. But regardless of the cause, such intentional dispersal remains one of the most challenging aspects of managing invasive species. So now that the process has been explained, we pivot to the negative impacts of biological invasions. I like to structure this part off with the definition of invasive species. First environmental, then economic, and then finish with human health impacts. So let's start this off by just revisiting the definition of invasive species as a reminder. So invasive species are species that are non-native to the ecosystem under consideration, is spreading, and whose presence causes or is likely to cause environmental or economic harm or harm to human health. So let's talk about some of these harms. So these examples are plant-specific, but generally invasive plant species harm native species through predation, habitat degradation, or competition for shared resources depending on the taxa. So while I present this slide, I'll try to give an example for each bullet. So first, we have changes in water and nutrition cycling. For example, some studies show that various eucalyptus are more efficient in water use and have increased transpiration rates, altering the hydrology of an invaded region. And then a good example of changes in nutrient cycling is the lead tree here in Florida. This tree is a nitrogen-fixing wooded plant that pulls in nitrogen from the atmosphere and converts it into ammonia or other related nitrogenous compounds in soil. Therefore, the lead tree can grow in nitrogen-poor soils and effectively change the nutrient cycling in ecosystem through nitrogen addition. So then we have altered disturbance regimes. So this is most clearly illustrated by this very intense and hot Melaleuca fire. So fire is natural and critical to the survival of pinelands and prairie ecosystems of the Everglades, and naturally occurring fires have historically been ground fires that burn through low-growing grasses and bushes, but characteristically do not reach the upper tree canopies, thereby keeping the trees alive. However, Melaleuca is a fire-adapted species. It has a thick, spongy bark that protects its cambium layer from fire, while the papery outer layers serve as a ladder to shuttle flames up into the canopy. So volatile oils in the foliage additionally fuel intense crown fires. So although adult Melaleuca trees can survive these intense crown fires, these fires often end up killing native and endangered vegetation. So next, we have increases in resource competition. And for this, I like to think of the lygodium. So these lygodium vines can grow to overtop native vegetation as illustrated in this photo here. So this smothering growth habit allows all the vines to access the incoming sunlight while native species are kind of suffocated and suffer a reduction in sunlight. So in this case of Lygodium, it really outcompetes for both space as a resource and competes for sunlight from native species as well. So all of these examples can ultimately result in a reduction of native species. So I want to go through a couple more examples. So here's another illustration of ecosystem effects. The first is a photo of a lake that's heavily invaded by hydrilla. And then the second is the same lake from the same spot after some treatment. So you can kind of see how hydrilla had covered and really clogged up the waterway here, but then later it became really cleared up afterwards. And this is a good example or opportunity to give you kind of like a sneak peek into the economic impacts of invasions as well, as hydrilla really severely impeded the movement of boats and other recreational activities. All right, so I'm going to transition a bit to the human health impacts by looking at this example of the giant African land snail. So the giant African snail can grow to be the world's largest terrestrial mollusk. Its shell can reach more than 8 inches in length, and additionally, they have a voracious appetite, it being able to consume over 500 different types of plant. They rapidly devour fruits, vegetables, and ornamental plants, wiping out small farms overnight. In places where snails do not have enough calcium in the environment to build their shells, they've even been known to eat the stucco of houses and the paint off of cars. Additionally, the snails are considered a public health threat, and their slime is home to the parasitic rat lungworm, which can cause all sorts of diseases such as meningitis. And another plant that has human health impacts are the giant hogweed, which is a large, tall, invasive plant. Thankfully, it is not yet present in Florida, but it is a good example of demonstrating how invasive plants can have human health impacts. So this plant is a garden ornamental originally from Southwest Asia, but that is starting to naturalize in North America. It is used as a showpiece in arboretums and gardens and is also a favorite of beekeepers. However, the clear, watery sap of giant hogweed contains toxins that can cause severe dermatitis or inflammation of the skin. So you can get severe burns if you get the sap on your skin, and then the skin is then exposed to sunlight. Symptoms can occur within 48 hours and consist of painful blisters. And then, even after the blister is over, purplish scars may form that may last for several years. Additionally, if you happen to get some of this sap into your eye contact, that has been reported to cause temporary or even permanent blindness. So here we have some photos of how bad these things really can be. So another major cost of invasion, and I think the final one that we're talking about today, is economic. As noted here, invasions have cost the United States $1.26 trillion between 1960 and 2017, with citrus screening alone resulting in $1.7 billion of loss in the past 5 years. Hopefully, these statistics show how expensive biological invasions are to manage, with these invasive plant management costing Florida $43 million per year, and that number is only likely to go up ever since I looked up that data. So if you look up at the chart at the top of the right of the many invasive plants and the cost, you can see that the ones that are highlighted have been particularly bad. So we have the usual suspects of Lygodium, Brazilian pepper tree, and the Melaleuca tree, but notice how the two most damaging plants, the hydrilla and the water hyacinth, are both aquatic. This really illustrates how expensive managing aquatic plants can be in particular, and that plays a large role in us assessing the invasion risk of certain non-native plants that may be in Florida. So all put together, a UN report estimated that invasion species cost the global economy $423 billion every year. Now that is a lot of money, and I did a bit of digging around to see what we could do with the kind of money to kind of put it into context. So that money is more than the GDP of South Africa or Denmark. You could buy a new Lamborghini for everybody in the city of Seattle, or about 700,000 people. We can pretty much fix homelessness in the United States by building 1 million full-size houses. And $423 billion a year is nearly double the money that the United Nations estimate it would take to solve world hunger. So think about that. If we fix the problem of invasive species today, we could literally solve world hunger almost twice over. But with all that, what can we kind of do about it? Kind of trying to understand the best ways to manage invasive species. Well, the invasive curve is an invasion classic. So here the x-axis is time. Meanwhile, the y-axis shows the areas invaded and the corresponding management costs. So once a species is introduced, as you move through time, the area becomes invasive, the area that becomes invaded and the control costs both increase. So if we can eradicate, or better yet, prevent potentially invasive species, so kind of by stopping it right at the beginning, the cost of management will be so much lower than if we were unable to do so. There's kind of a correlation with human diseases here. It is much better to prevent diseases through vaccinations or whatever than letting it get out of hand. And I'm sure we're all very aware of what can happen if diseases get out of hand and how devastating and difficult it can be to manage such kind of public health disasters. So, the big question, how do we stay ahead of this invasion curve? So let's go over some basic management strategies. I'm guessing a lot of you will be familiar with this at this point. But the best, as I mentioned previously, is by preventing things from getting here in the first place. So I like the noxious weed list is one of the most effective means by and it does that by prohibiting the sale of potentially invasive plants. Then there is the early detection and rapid response strategy, or EDRR, where we aggressively target a recent invader. So some control methods can be mechanical, so mowing, chemical, herbicides, or what I consider really cool, biocontrol. One biocontrol method that has been very promising for me is the air potato leaf beetle, which eats the leaf of the air potato vine and prevents it from reproducing and spreading further. And what I found really cool about these kind of successful biocontrol is that they only really target that one invasive plant and doesn't cause harm to any of the surrounding plants. With all of this, assessing the potential risk of invasive plants is also very important. While we don't know what can be invasive, if we don't know what can be invasive, we cannot target and monitor them and kind of have this bio control research ongoing. So broadly speaking, risk can be assessed through two axes of this table here. So likelihood of establishment and their corresponding impact. So following this table, the riskiest plants in the deep red are those that have high impacts as well as high likelihood of establishment. In contrast, a plant can have the most damaging effects, but if it's unlikely to establish in an area, then its relative risk is medium at best. So some examples of this. So again, I'm kind of thinking about animals because I found that people relate to these better. The green iguanas is pretty invasive in Florida, but it doesn't really pose a risk to other areas like Maine or Alaska. Meanwhile, the polar bear is one of the deadliest animals out there, but it's not really well suited for Florida climates, is it? So it's unlikely to become invasive and problematic here in Gainesville, Miami-Dade, Orlando, etc. Hopefully. So in this context, the UF IFAS assessment is one of the many tools that we have to manage invasive species and kind of figure out if a plant can be potentially invasive. So the UF IFAS assessment has three main roles. One, to evaluate the risk of species before it enters the states, such as the multiflora rose. Evaluate the status of species that are currently present in the state, such as the hairy indigo plant. And evaluate the invasion risk of cultivars or artificially modified plants, such as this harbor dwarf. So the first tool I will show you is the prediction tool, which we have discussed briefly before. As a reminder, this is used for plants that are not yet established in Florida yet. Of all of our tools, I say this is the one that has the best return on investment because, as we have discussed before, dealing with plant invasion early in the invasion process through prevention is the most cost-effective thing out there. This model is based on the Australian model. However, we modify questions related to climate, precipitation, and soils to be more specific to Florida. So this tool has thankfully been tested for accuracy across multiple geographic areas, and it has been shown to be roughly 90% accurate in predicting major invaders. And using this tool, the IFAS assessment has evaluated more than 200 species with this tool so far, and I think we're getting close to 300 now. A good success story of this predictive tool is with the beach vitex. My predecessor, Dr. Dia Laurence, evaluated with the predictive tool and assessed it to be of high invasion risk. She then worked with local and state officials to have this plant listed in the state noxious weed list, greatly reducing the chance that this species will become invasive in Florida. The questions in the assessment falls into two broad categories, a plant's biogeography and ecology. And each of these 49 questions here then add up to a score, which we then use to define invasion risk. But all of this is a very complicated way of asking. One, is a plant considered weedy at some other place in the world? And two, can this plant actually survive in Florida? A key part that I helped develop are these climate suitability maps. The goal of these suitability maps are to determine if a plant in question can actually survive in Florida. These maps go along a gradient suitability from high to low as determined by the shaded colors you can see here. So for this example, we can see that this plant is highly suitable for the southern and central regions of Florida, but not quite as well suited for the northern region. Meanwhile, this plant will probably not even survive any further north. So compiling everything together, we then issued these conclusions. Here, we're predicting what plants will become a problem in the future with high, moderate, and low risk. People in the field then can use these predictions to manage the plants accordingly. So second, we have the status assessments, which is used to determine which non-native species in our landscape are currently behaving invasive. Think of it as kind of like diagnosing the invasion. So much of this, thankfully, is similar to the predictive tool we talked about before. But a key difference is that we complete the assessments with the help of experts in the field and land managers and other scientists by asking them questions about the impacts of this plant, the management efficacy, and the current range of the plant. And note that there may be differences in conclusions based on the state zone and kind of where you are in the state. So this kind of field data can include testimony from master gardeners or landscape managers or etc. So all the audience members here. So if you ever want to help out with this assessment, please let me know, and there will be a sign-up sheet about that at the end of this presentation. So kind of with the status assessments, we have these conclusions, which are kind of similarly colored as those with the predictive tools. So all red species cannot be recommended by university faculty or staff because they are invasive. Caution means that it is okay to recommend, but you must indicate that it should be managed to prevent escape. Meanwhile, green means go, means these species are currently not invading natural areas and are okay to recommend them plant around. It is important to note, however, that you can have more than one conclusion for a species by the zones of the state. So for example, a plant can be invasive and not recommended for the northern areas of the state, but it can be cautioned in the central area and then completely okay to use down in Miami or southern Florida. And finally, we have the infra-specific taxon protocol, or the ITP. So this tool predicts whether a cultivar, hybrid, or variety will become invasive. These are used by the university's cultivar release process and broadly looks at if the variety or the cultivar is a distinct form or from the parent taxon and if it will behave differently. So to make sure these cultivars don't become invasive, we ask horticulturalists to answer various questions. So most of these are to make sure that plant is not going to become invasive or can become invasive in the future. So if you ever see a plant or a cultivar in your gardens or in Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, it is very likely that it has gone through this process before, so it's probably hopefully safe to use. But however, much of everything that I do is possible because local stakeholders and people in the field report potentially invasive plants to us, and we work and collaborate with them very closely. So one example of how collaboration helps our assessment is with the palm gum tree. I mentioned this plant previously and how this plant is becoming an increasing concern in southern Florida. So to get a better sense of how this plant is doing, we collaborated with Florida Fish and Wildlife, or FWC, a professor from Florida Atlantic University, and others to survey the extent of escaped populations. Our efforts found that more than 300 escaped individuals growing in the region, especially around the Cocohatchee and St. Lucie rivers. This effort will hopefully get us a published article soon and bring further awareness of this potentially problematic plant and try to get it listed on more invasive species lists out there. And as another example, we have this plant called the Errata erecta, or the panic veldtgrass. A person working in Leon County by Tallahassee got a notification that someone had found this plant growing in the roadside. They then contacted me to estimate the invasion risk of this species. Lo and behold, this plant was considered weedy and invasive in California and climatically suitable in northern and central Florida, as you can see here. Thankfully, this case seems to be a false alarm, but as this example and the one for the pangolin tree hopefully showed, with the partnership between the assessment and local stakeholders, we can make a big impact on controlling invasive species. So I kind of want to finish up by talking about the IFAS assessment. So with the IFAS assessment, we have a website as linked here that you can use to kind of look at all the various plants that we've looked at. You can click on each of these spots as marked by the arrow to access our database over there. So many different ways to access our database. And additionally, we have this cool and handy feature of the website where we kind of allow users to filter out using the system. This lets you sort our database by zones, conclusion type, and other characteristics. And I believe we also have this FAQ page. We also have this FAQ page, which gives you the information on how we do things. So all these arrows kind of show you how to filter the different areas, and then the FAQ page at the top right. And once you select the profile, you'll get a page kind of like this one. So this is for Disortus rotundifolia, or the pink lady. We assess this plant to be of high invasion risk for the south, but caution for central and north. Now this had a lot to do with the climate suitability for this plant, which we show here. Please note, however, that we don't actually have the maps for all of these plants yet, but I'm working very hard on it. And then going further down, you can see the detailed data on this plant as well as some relevant links. Now, one of the things I would really like to add is a section on native alternatives to each of the non-native plants that we have here. So while you're going through this, if you have an idea of a good native alternative, please let me know through the contact form, and then we'll work on it probably later this year or hopefully early next year and trying to get all of those listed on our website. All right, so one more thing. So finally, I want to finish up by talking about the different plant lists. So my predecessor, Dr. Dia Laurence, helped write this article, which I am sharing now, that does a good job explaining them. But I'll go through some of them with you now. But you can kind of look at this. You can pause you can look at the recording later to kind of access this whole document and manuscript that she wrote. And I believe it's actually on our FAQ page as well. But we'll go through the basics of what she wrote down now. So the main regulatory lists that we have are the noxious weed lists. There's both the federal and the state weed list. These legally prohibit the sale of plants in the list, with violators being fined. Yeah, and then we have the Florida state weed list as well. Then we have the two main non-regulatory lists, the IFAS Assessment and the FISC, or the Florida Invasive Species Council list. FISC was formerly known as FLEPC, but have rebranded themselves as FISC recently. Now, these are mainly similar, but FISC lists are a bit more comprehensive and are separated into two categories, with the first being those that alter communities by displacing native species, changing community structure or ecological function, or hybridizing natives, and the second being those that have increasing abundance or frequency, but have not yet altered the Florida plant communities to the extent shown by Category 1. Meanwhile, the IFAS assessment, which is me, shows the most conservative, risk-averse estimates of the invasion risk of plants. It is important to note, however, that both of these lists cannot legally prohibit species. It is only the noxious weed list that I showed previously that can do that. And coincidentally, even for the non-regulatory list, I was recently voted on to be a member of the FISC list as well. So I will be involved with both of these. And if you have a certain plant that you think should be listed at either of these lists, please do let me know. So finally, let's end up with some take-home points. So first of all, I wanted to stress that not all non-native species are invasive. Species can be introduced either intentionally or accidentally, and invasive species are those that cause harm to the ecosystem and our economy. And that it is important to stress that the longer it takes to identify and manage an invader, the more damage that is going to be done. And Florida's susceptibility to invasion is influenced by its climate and trade and tourism. And finally, the IFAS assessment is a risk that you can look to see if a plant is invasive or not. And all we kind of look at is basically it looks like if a plant is climatically suitable for Florida, and if if that species is considered invasive or weedy someplace else in the world. And finally, hopefully you get a brief sense of kind of knowing the difference between the different plant lists present in Florida, with the regulatory list being the noxious weed list, which prohibit the sale and use of any plants, and the non-regulatory list, such as the IFAS assessment, and the FISC list, which is kind of more advisory and cautionary form of list, which many people can use to better manage plants and use them out there. So with that, the final slides has our website as well as my email. And on our bottom right, we have the QR code if you want to sign up and help with the status assessment. Because again, I like to stress that collaboration with all these local stakeholders, with the audience members here, is kind of what keeps all of our things going and making sure the invasive plants don't become more of a problem than it already is. So thank you so much, and I'll take any questions now. And also, I need to grab some water.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Kim. We have a few questions here. And I did in the chat put the link to sign up for payment of the CEU course if you want it to be counted as a CEU. And also the assessment website link is in the chat as well. The first question is if maybe a PDF of your slideshow might be available to participants. Is that something you're willing to share or?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I can email it to you, by the end of this week.
Perfect. Thank you. Also, this recording will be posted on our website. It usually takes 1 to 2 weeks for us to make sure that closed captioning and all of that is correct. So you'll be able to get a link to this presentation on our website under resources and webinars. Excuse me. Is there, I'm sorry, if there is a Brazilian pepper plant on the property that does not produce flowers, I'm sorry, a male Brazilian pepper plant, should it still be removed?
I would say yes, because male plants can still influence the pollen network of the area. So even if it's not producing fruits itself, it can still help propagate the rest of its populations by,
Right.
helping pollinate it.
Right, and I think we suggest taking down any of the invasives. All right. So the USDA map within the assessment site was extremely helpful to learn if an invasive is in our country or a neighboring country. I'm not sure they meant county, but however, the map appears to be disabled by current federal administrations. Is there a workaround? Is there a way to find that map? The USDA
I'm not
assessment.
sure. I cannot speak for the USDA, but another good sources for kind of looking at these kind of maps, there's Plants of the World Online.
Okay.
Yeah, Plants of the World Online. And if you type in Plants of the World Online and the plant you're interested in, they give you pretty good maps, but I think they might be by states. But if you're interested in kind of looking at the more county level, you can either look at, there's a very good website called EdMaps, EDD Maps. And that
Okay.
kind of gives you kind of like a form of iNaturalist. You can see the different occurrence points out there.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see. I see big box stores selling plants that are either on the invasive species list and or are plants that have a high invasion risk. How can we have them accountable for selling low risk and or native plants? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, see, that's the one thing that I've repeatedly heard it being a kind of a thorn in our side.
Mhm.
So, because our lists are non-regulatory, there's nothing legally we can do to stop them from selling these kind of plants. But one of the things that I would like to do more is to engage more with these nurseries directly. Because again, I'd be willing to bet that a lot of these people aren't just selling these things because they want to harm the environment. And if they had a viable alternative to these plants, they will readily sell these. So the first step that I think that we can do to first like help this is kind of identifying either native or low risk plants that can be used as alternatives to these high invasion risk plants that they can sell instead. And two, and this is kind of on me, engaging with them more directly to figure out like kind of getting them an idea of like, hey, a lot of these plants are being on high invasion risk and causing problems elsewhere in the state. Can you perhaps look at this alternative list that we have and kind of work from there? But I think that's going to be tricky, but it's going to have to be an ongoing process.
Okay. Could you please explain high invasion risk? That's one thing we didn't see in your presentation, and I know that that's something that I'm not sure how new it is, but it's more recent than the other parts of the assessment. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so high invasion risk. So I think I kind of changed the wording a little bit in my when I was giving this presentation. So
Mhm.
previously I mentioned there is the predictive tool, and you saw like
Mhm.
the red, yellow, green. So predictive tool that looks at plants that are not yet established in Florida. And high invasion risk plants are plants that are not yet established in Florida, but we think is going to become invasive if it enters the state. So it's not yet in Florida, but if it gets here, we are willing to bet a little bit that it's going to become invasive in the future. So that's kind of
Okay,
what we meant.
and it is one that IFAS employees are not allowed to recommend, correct?
Yes.
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 So anything that you all see in the assessment that is a red color, you won't hear IFAS employees recommend. Let's see. The noxious weed assessment is updated about every 10 years. Isn't it better to use the FISC or FLEPC list, which is updated every 2?
I agree. I think for people like yourselves, like I think looking more into the non-regulatory list or the IFAS assessment or the FISC list is good because we have many more species out there um, that we kind of caution against using. So for you guys, like in the audience, I say 100% please use our websites or in our list. The noxious weed list is there for these like big companies like that likes to bring plants in, and it's kind of like our final firewall. Like to get something on the noxious weed list, and I've been involved in one talks about this, is a very thorough process and has to look at all sorts of economic values that some of these plants have. So it's a very long, drawn out process. So definitely, please use the list that we have available now.
Great. Okay, so how is the changing climate affecting the spread of invasive plants?
So that's a big one. And the simple answer is that generally the changing climates is kind of helping the spread of invasive plants. And this is very clear in Florida, where we have these very distinct climate zones. Like the climate in Miami is completely different than the climate up in Tallahassee or Gainesville. But with climate change, we can see like it's starting to get warmer and warmer with fewer frost up in the northern areas. And we're seeing both animals and plants slowly starting to creep its way up. So that's the simple answer that like it's going to be moving on, but climate change just by its very nature is unpredictable. So I'd be willing to bet that there's going to be differences in the ways that these plants interact with animals that are now brought in, and now their spread is more accelerated by climate change, and so things might spread much more dramatically than we might have modeled with the just when we're looking at plants themselves. So
Okay.
short answer, it's going to help spread it more, but it's how much they're going to spread is kind of an uncertainty, I think.
Okay. What does the conclusion type invasive no use mean?
So invasive no use, so that is done through our status assessment, which as a reminder are done for plants that are already established in Florida. And these are the ones that we need people's help with in kind of looking at how these plants are behaving in the field. So invasive no use are plants that are again in the big red. So they're currently being invasive in Florida. They're here in Florida, they're invasive. So an example of that will probably be things like, the Brazilian pepper tree. So don't use that.
Okay. How are you assessing the intersection of plants that are not necessarily invasive but can cause harm to native insect species?
So that we do consider if a plant causes harm to you know animals or other organisms as part of our assessment. So just because a plant's not, plant may not harm other plants, but if it harms any animals, that definitely goes against this plant when we're doing our assessment. So we do consider it.
Okay. The let me see here. Okay, how many CEUs are offered for FNGLA, FDAX, and LIAF? It's all one for each of those, just as a housekeeping question. Okay, some plants listed as high invasion risk listed for reassessment in 10 years. Why is the timeline for reassessment so long?
So that's actually something that I've been thinking about myself. So as a context, I started this about 11 months ago, and this was a system that we have had. But I do agree that maybe 10 years is a bit much. I think one of the issues that we have is just kind of lack of manpower. Like it's just me currently like reassessing these plans. And from my predecessor's experience, assessing them every 10 years, unless we have heard something about this plant, has been sufficient, I believe. But I will be willing to talk to my advisor, my boss, about potentially lowering that to maybe like say 5 years or something. Now, for plants that are already established in Florida for status assessments, I believe our turnaround time, I believe, is every 2 years. But again, because just the lack of manpower, kind of sticking to that 2 years has been kind of difficult. So we have been forced to kind of prioritize plants that we think needs to be reassessed more that are potentially even more dangerous than other plants that we are fairly confident is not going to cause a problem at all. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Let's see. What is let's see, I might have to clarify this. What is the appropriate action for prohibited versus invasive species?
So prohibited plants it should be any plants that are already on the noxious weed list. So they're legally prohibited. You cannot buy them or plant them unless you have a specific type of permit, I believe.
Mhm.
And if you are caught, you will be fined by either the state or the federal government. So there's that. Invasive no use is, again, we don't have any legally binding things we can do to you, but it will be a bad thing to do.
Let me see here. Let's see, we'll try this one. Should developers remove invasive plants as required before construction only when the plant is not in seed to lessen the spread? Is there information available as part of the information on the IFAS website? Did you get that?
Yeah, so I can try to answer it as best as I can, but I think a lot of these seeds they're going to be species specific, and ideally, or at least the ones that are most problematic, there should be a separate article about how to best manage these kind of plants. So I think if you look up University of Florida and with the plant's name, you'll find these things called EDIS documents, EDIS. A lot of these will give you like a more management style questions. That being said, I do believe that just from my personal experience that like removing these seed, removing the plants in general is good, but if you can try to get it before they're, mature and whatever would be the best. And
Mhm.
second, that brings me up to another thing I would like to add to each of these plant profiles is like kind of like a short little blurb on how to best manage them or like a good link into management things. I think that could be another good thing to add. I believe we're talking with the IT person about this in the coming months, so hopefully we can get those added very soon.
Great. Let me see here. What about native plants that can possibly take over natural areas? How do you feel about that? What can you say about that?
So kind of this is complicated because
Mm.
we just traditionally we think like native species in general, those are the ones that we like to have. But I fully understand that native plants can become a weed. So I know this is not what you exactly asked, but so if you see it in your garden, like whatever, like just because it's native, that doesn't, we're not telling you to just keep them, even if they're being weedy. You can remove any kind of weeds that you want at your property. But if these native plants are starting to encroach upon native places, that's probably because those native environments have been disturbed or something by human development, construction, um, etc. And ideally, those plants are the ones that are kind of going along the natural succession path of a disturbed area. So like a plant will first settle in, and then this is just like a natural cycle. So
Mhm.
I would say just kind of leave those alone, but again, it's going to be plant specific, and I'm not an expert on that.
Okay, great, thank you. Can the assessment pages emphasize the mechanism by which a plant spreads? While there are lists on the PDF assessments and growth habits are listed, they aren't shown on the main page.
That can be something I can talk about. Yeah, it's, maybe like for each of these profiles, we can talk about like some very broad bullet points of like kind of what made this plant
Mhm.
like highly invasive in the first place. That's a good idea. Thank you.
Yeah. And I know with your predictive tools, you at the bottom of each of your plants that you've predicted for, though you have notes there also, right? Don't you have documents that show how you?
Yeah, we have the documents, but I believe the question asks like they know it's there, but I think it will be helpful to have it on the main profile page. And I
Yeah,
think I
yeah.
agree. I think the thing I'm a little worried about is like we don't want to make each profile too cluttered. So we'll see how it looks. But that's a good idea. I'll definitely consider it. Thank you.
Okay. Um, what else do we have here? This is not a plant question, but what is the current status of the giant snail,
I
if you
believe it's
know?
still around. Yeah, it's still around and still causing problems. I know people, FWC, Florida Fish and Wildlife, are very active in managing it. I don't work with them directly though, but I believe they're still around.
Okay. Looks like we're very close to the end here. Let me look for a couple more. Well, I'm looking, did you have anything you wanted to add, based on the questions or, I know, you've asked for people, here's a question. Do you have to have a degree to help with the status assessment?
Absolutely not. Like no, I think as long as you're familiar with this plant in a certain area, that's kind of
Mhm.
all we ask for. And like, a degree is not a substitute for competence or intelligence or anything, I believe. So if you know a
Okay,
lot about this plant and how it's behaving, no need to have a degree.
okay. And how would they get involved? How would people on, this webinar contact you? Would you just like them to email you
Yes,
if they're
in
interested?
our website should have like a contact us, kind of you can see it on the top right there. If you
Okay,
click on that, there'll be a little form that you can fill in.
okay. So if you all are interested in, contributing what you know around your area to Dr. Kim, use the contact us on the UF assessment page. So that's about all the time we have for now. Dr. Kim, thank you so much for coming on and explaining this very important topic to us. I really appreciate your time and for your explanations of this to our professional audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a great day.